Welcome back, everyone, to the AM Take podcast. I'm Marv.
And I'm Amy, and we're two peas in a pod. Cast. Do you like my joke?
That was pretty good. Join us as we explore a variety of topics every week.
And this week, we'll be sharing our experience growing up from school life to culture clash.
Culture clash. How exciting. All right. So for this week, we got our first mail from Chris. He sent an email in with a few questions about the show, as well as some suggestions for topics. And we took that into consideration, and that's where we're going with this week. Chris wrote to us and he said, "Great job so far. How were your experiences growing up as Asian Americans / Canadians in the places you both lived throughout your lives, and what do you see in store for future generations of Asian Americans / Canadians?"
Is Asian culture blending into American Canadian culture, or do you think it's being erased? How do you feel about interracial dating or dating outside your ethnicity, and how accepted is it within your communities? Do you feel that it's important for people to keep up with their traditional and cultural practices, or is it more important to review them and create more modern forms of these practices? For example, in the Hmong community, it was very accepted for a man to take multiple wives, even in this day and age. Some people still practice this. Seeing as you're both Asian, it'd be nice to hear the AM take.
Thanks, Chris, for writing into us. And those are some really good questions. So we're going to try and attempt to address those from our perspectives, obviously. And so there's many, many different perspectives, but this is going to be our take on it as well, obviously. And in general, the topic today will definitely overlap with a lot of those questions and points that Chris brought up. And so our first point is going to be, how was life growing up as an Asian American or as an Asian Canadian, and what do you predict for the future generation?
So my experience growing up in school life is kind of unfortunate, especially when I was in elementary school, because I did deal with some bullying and some form of racism, and it got better in high school because I was focusing on my studies and I had a tight friend group, but I was still the only Asian in school.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because, well, I was born in the city, but then we moved to somewhere more, I was going to say remote, but the suburbs. And so in the suburbs, there weren't that many multi-ethnicity
I see.
type of environment. So, but it still got better, like I didn't get bullied anymore by classmates or whatnot. And also, it was the age of the internet. That's when I started to really dive into the internet as a form of escape. And then in college, I was surprised that there was a whole Asian town or whatnot. Lots of Chinese people.
Okay.
Every day I would go to the cafeteria and there was like this Chinatown.
Did you feel more inclusive? Did you feel it was more inclusive, or did you still feel like you were an outsider, I guess, coming from like a suburban area?
Oh, no. I felt like it was way more inclusive.
Oh, okay.
I started having, I was part of like this Asian group of friends, and we formed really tight bonds. That was not available to me prior to that.
Oh, wow.
But no, yeah, like it's nice. It's nice as I grew older as an adult, I could associate with more Asians. And it was nice to have friends that share my culture. They'll get me.
Oh, yeah.
But aside for that, not gonna lie, that bullying when I was younger, it's done some emotional damage. But you know how it is.
Yeah.
The adult mental health is shaped by what's happened in childhood, and it did affect me. It still does in some way, but throughout my adulthood, I heal from it. Like you have to learn how to deal with it, so you move forward. And
Isn't that the Asian mentality? Deal with it, right?
It is, isn't it? But
Yeah. Suck it up and move on, right?
yeah. But truth be told, though, I've had these thoughts of kind of worrying for the future of my children potentially, because Joe is not Chinese. Joe is born here, born and raised here, so he's white. And well, if we ever have kids together, they'll be mixed, right? So I did think about, hey, if I went through bullying like that, will my children also go through the same thing? But maybe I'm being paranoid, because maybe the future is not, it's not like the past. It's more accepted now and all that. So But there's a little part of me that still fears that.
Yeah, I mean, with bullying, I think just in general, growing up as kids, going to be dealing with bullies. It doesn't really matter, I think. It just, your circumstance, obviously, if you're the only Asian person in a school full of non-Asians, then of course you're the outsider, you're the different one. So it's easy to pick on you. And like you said, nowadays,
I had kids just running after me and then constantly asking me questions about China. Like, hey, what's your name? My name is Amy. No, what's your real name? The hell? Go away. And I would run away. I would run away, but they would chase me down. They would like not leave me in peace.
So was this like, did they address you in English or was it in French or?
No, in French. In French.
Oh, it was in French. I see. That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. It would be questions like microaggressions. Is it true that China invented paper? Is it true that XYZ? Is it true? Like, I don't know. Just get away.
Yeah, kids.
Of course, there's.
Yeah, kids.
Yeah, kids are kids. There's that's just a light form of harassment, though. Like, anyway, I don't want to get too deep into the shit that I went through. But anyway, how was your experience growing up? How was your school life?
Wow, it was completely opposite, I'd say. So I grew up in, it's almost inner city, I guess you can say. And up until high school, I had a very core group of friends that I solidified probably around the third grade. It was a very diverse group of people, different varying cultures, varying backgrounds. It wasn't just Asian, it was Asian, Hispanic, white, Portuguese, black as well too. And so it was very fun, I guess you could say, as a kid. Nice. Because you had so many different perspectives and you had the same types of culture or types of upbringing with, but then you had others that you were able to identify with as well too. Relate to as immigrant kids, things on that level. And it wasn't until so this was in the Northeast United States, so very diverse, multicultural. And it wasn't until after 9th grade when we decided to move to the southern states. And that was my introduction to racism and to not really bullying, because in high school I really kept to myself. I tried to keep a low profile. And another issue with that was when we first moved, we didn't really settle on an area where we wanted to live, or my parents where they wanted for us to live. And so I went to 2 different high schools, one high school for sophomore and then another high school for my junior and senior year. And they were very drastically different. One school was closer to what I was used to, but very different at the same time. I guess different school cultures. Football was a very big topic and big thing. I never really gave it much thought for me. And so that was kind of the big thing. And it was hard for me to get used to that. And on top of that, obviously having made friends that you knew since 3rd grade up until 9th grade, and then all of a sudden having to make new friends in the middle of high school where everyone already has their clique, everyone already has their friends that they've been going to school with for X number of years. So that was hard, just breaking in. I did get in with a group of Asian people. It was pretty cool. We had this thing going. And then obviously that was only for 1 year. And then I switched to a different school. And this is out in the suburbs. Actually, it's probably further than the suburbs. It was the rural area.
Okay.
And basically, for someone who grew up in the city and being close to poverty and things like that, it was so different going to this school because it was predominantly white, upper middle class, or even lower rich neighborhoods and things like that. And it was such a departure from what I knew. I felt so out of place because it was me and probably my brother and then two other Korean kids, and that was it for the
entire school.
The Asian people I knew there.
Yeah,
in the high school. And the good thing though is I didn't really see any bullying, but at the same time, it was hard to approach people because they didn't think I knew how to speak English, and at the same time, it was you still felt like an outsider even though you weren't bullied. So I guess it was just another form of exclusion. It felt like because I didn't dress the same way, I didn't like the same things, so things like that. So that was shocking.
I feel like also there's a factor of it doesn't matter what nationality you are. The fact that you're a transfer student, there's always going to be that initial exclusion, whether it be temporary or permanent. That's another issue. Well, not another issue, but that's another thing. But yeah.
Oh yeah, on top of everything else, yeah, for sure. Because these people knew each other going to class, and then going to class for the first time on the first day, and people already know each other. And I'm sitting there like, oh, okay, so I'm the one who doesn't know anyone. So I'm taking steps to introduce myself, and it falls flat because there's no reason for them to be friends with you when they have their friends. So that really affected me. Yeah.
Was it a challenge for you to introduce yourself to other people?
Oh yeah, definitely. Growing up in the northern parts of the United States and then moving to the southern part, it was just hard understanding people. On top of that, the dialect.
Oh, is it because of the accent?
Yeah, the accent was so strong. And you have to remember, this is out in the outskirts, not even close to a city. And so and so that was seeing people come to school in full camo was like weird to me, you know. I get it now, obviously.
Did that affect your grade, by the way?
No, because that's the only thing I was able to focus on was my schoolwork. Obviously, I was in honors class, but at the same time, growing up in high school and watching TV shows, and you see characters' experience in high school drastically different from yours, you know, and it kind of like, oh, am I the screwed up one? Am I doing something wrong, you know?
Yeah,
or is it my school that's not like this? So it was interesting reflecting back on it.
Yeah, but the media always paints a perfect picture.
Oh, yeah. It's not. But at the same time, I see it happening in front of me.
Yeah.
Groups of friends hanging out, and like, I don't have any friends. Ultimately, it did pass. I did make a few friends that were into gaming, and so I really didn't hang out in the lunchroom. I usually went to the library and made a few friends, and obviously got into Counter-Strike and Quake and Doom and played video games in the library, and that's who I ultimately ended up with. Did you ever
keep in touch with them?
No, actually.
Oh.
No, I lost contact with most of them. We all went to different colleges afterwards, and they all knew each other already.
Okay.
And I was just in that friend group, and for me, it was more acquaintances than anything else because at the same time, I was working as well too, and I was borrowing my mom's car to go to work, and so I never had time to hang out after class or anything like that, and so I wasn't able to really solidify that social fabric with them.
Okay.
And so that's maybe where the disconnect fell off on that. But in regards to the future generations, I feel like nowadays it is definitely more accepting. You know, nobody wants to be the outsider. Nobody wants to be that kid. And I think because a lot of people have been there or realized that they've been that person at one point, they're much more open to helping somebody not become that person.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen. You know, as I get older, you wonder, you're like, man, if only I, you know, had someone like that or anything like that. And so just one person can make such a huge difference in the lives of the life and the future of somebody who may be feeling like an outcast or something like that. So, but yeah, when you're talking about the emotional damage, yeah, I definitely see that because that made me like clam up for a long time.
Yeah.
And I thought I was very introverted because I was never participating in class. I was very quiet. Yeah. And I just never opened up to anybody. And it wasn't until college that it was completely different because nobody knew each other.
That's it.
You were free to become whoever you wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it didn't have any drama that you had in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every class, it would be a different people
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah, it was different
It's no
people.
longer the same class.
Yeah, and it was much more diverse because you didn't just have people from your immediate city. You had people from out of state. You had people from other countries.
Yeah, that's it.
They may look like you, but they may be different drastically because
it's much more diverse.
Yeah, it's significantly more diverse, and I really clinged on to that.
Yeah.
So that's where I really blossomed was in college because that essentially opened the doors for me to just become who I wanted to be.
Yeah.
As opposed to being afraid of what other people thought of me or, trying to mold myself.
Grow my child.
Exactly, essentially. And I attribute that to going to college because it wasn't, for me, college was much more than just a way for me to find my future career or job or anything like that. It was, it definitely helped me grow on a social aspect as well, too.
Yeah. So speaking of diversity, so it kind of falls into the next topic of, is Asian culture blending or fading? And is it important to keep up with traditions and practices? And it's kind of related because of the whole diversity thing. Do you think that your original culture is disappearing, essentially?
Yeah, it's, for me personally, it's definitely based on perspective.
Okay.
With any sort of mixing of cultures, of course, there's going to be pluses and minuses. You're gonna have traditions that you pass on. You have traditions that you forget, that you may not remember. Especially, I'm Hmong myself, like Chris, and so I definitely see it. A lot of the history of the Hmong culture is oral history, and so there's nothing written down or anything like that until very recently in the modern age. And so a lot of the cultural aspects or the traditional aspects you get from your parents telling you, and they got from their parents telling them. And it's really up to what you want to take in, what you can know for sure. Because I don't know, is it better to just try and pretend like you know something that's a tradition and pass that on as if it is, or is it better to just know of it and not try to, I guess, for lack of a better word, bastardize it? Because if you don't know the full history of it, is it right for you to try and fill in the gaps for it? Because then it's not really the culture anymore. It's you putting your own spin on it.
You're going radical.
Yeah, when Chris was asking about a modern take on it, that's interesting because I don't know. Like, do you take the conservative approach where you think, oh, better to leave it alone than to change it because then it's not the original culture anymore? But at the same time, a more liberal approach is be like, well, we don't know what our parents changed and what their parents changed. Who's to say that it's gonna stay the same? Because just like language is always changing. So culture must change at the same time, right? Because you take what you know from the current age and you add a little bit of the past to it and you move forward. So it's an interesting dance between those two, I think, in my personal opinion, but who's to say what's right and what's wrong? I think as long as you are able to take a step back and realize what is at stake here, then you can make the right decision based on who you are. Because sure, if you can't speak the language and you try, sure, you can understand it, sure. It's the best thing is that you try, you may not succeed, but we work with what we have, I think.
And for the Canadian listeners, well, we don't have a huge population of Hmong people here in Canada. And I wanted to ask you about your culture, actually, so that we kind
I'll try my best.
Learn more. We kind of learn more about your culture. And so from what I understand, you guys don't have your own country.
Yeah, we don't.
Because of in the history of Hmong people, you guys have been oppressed for a while. And you guys are a little bit everywhere, like Laos, Vietnam, some in China.
Yeah. Southern
Thailand,
Southeast
maybe?
Asia, yeah, definitely. Thailand,
Okay.
southern China, Vietnam, Laos as well.
And
So definitely, yeah, around that area.
what about your culture do you have fond memories of?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Like the
Oh
like,
goodness.
is it the food? Is there a special dish that
Oh,
you
okay.
absolutely love? Or is it the? I've seen some pictures of Hmong people and the women in the traditional clothing, and they're very very colorful. So that I find that pretty. Is there a specific folk dance that you guys do?
Maybe. I don't know. I wish I knew, but I don't know if it's a traditional folk dance or anything like that per se,
Okay.
but I know that there is sort of there's a yearly gathering. I guess you can call it. For us, it's called New Year's basically, and so
Okay.
it's a celebration of like.
Does it also follow the lunar calendar?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Oh.
It's usually based on the times of the years that it occurs in. Roughly, it follows more the harvest era, the harvest era, or the harvest moon era. I guess the fall solstice. It's usually between October and November, and that coincides with when it's harvest time, especially in
Oh.
farming cultures such as Hmong.
Shoot, do you know this year's New Year? When is it gonna be?
It really depends on the area, because
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
different every. Wait, what?
yeah, it's different, but it's all around the same time frame because sometimes a lot of Hmong communities do it during Thanksgiving
Okay.
ish time because that's obviously people are off from work, so they have time to be able to celebrate together.
Ah.
Some do it during Columbus Day because Columbus Day is a national holiday in the States, and so you get an extra day off. It's usually a Monday,
Okay.
so you can do Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it goes as far as into December as well too. So that's from my very limited knowledge of knowing about
Okay.
different locations.
And what do you do during this holiday?
Well, it's like you brought up food, right? Food.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like food stalls and food vendors that sell a lot of traditional Hmong food,
Okay.
like Hmong sausage, sticky rice, papaya salad. It's a staple of Southeast Asian cuisine, but it has a different spin on it. So it's very similar to Laotian cuisine, but it's not at the same time too. So that's one aspect of it. I think traditionally, now I may be wrong, and if you guys know the right answer, feel free to correct me. I'm totally fine with that. But traditionally, I think New Year's was a gathering time of, you have the guys and you have the women, and they dress up and they, it's a time to potentially find a
matchmaking thing.
Yeah, it's like that basically, and so that's why they dress up the way they do.
Okay.
And what they do is we call it ball tossing. You basically find a someone that interests you, and you ask them if they want to go ball tossing. You just toss the ball back and forth, and maybe ask them a few questions about themselves.
Okay.
So yeah,
That's interesting.
but I never participated in that because it was so out of my comfort zone, I guess you could say. But talking to my parents about it, it's incredibly interesting, and reflecting, watching documentaries on it, it's very interesting how it was done, because a lot of people look forward to that time of year. That's when they put on their best face, they put on their best clothing, because like I said, it is a farming culture, and so you want to be able to build a family, I guess.
It's
ultimately.
important because that's your
So
future, your potential future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. And so, but yeah, growing up, it was for that reason too. You would go there in hopes of finding somebody to date or anything like that. So that was definitely a big thing, I know for sure, growing up. But obviously, my high school years, I was in not such a great place in my life, so it wasn't like I wasn't really interested in that stuff. I was just interested in surviving the next day at school, and getting my way out, I guess you could say. So, but yeah, that's my opinion. And in regards to like certain things of the Hmong culture that I hold dear to my heart, I'd say the language.
Okay.
There's a lot of sayings and proverbs and things of that nature that when my mom would tell me, and if you translate like literally, it makes no sense like in English, but it's so descriptive and it's so
poetic,
almost poetic. And in Hmong, if you know the Hmong language, like one particular one that she always brings up is if you have jaundice or if you're sick or something like that, then in Hmong they say that you have your danjena, which means it literally means yellow air. But if you're translating for a Hmong person, you say, "Oh, he says he has yellow air," because no one will understand what you're saying. It just means you're sick or you're gaunt or you're not eating enough or something like that. So, and it's just certain things like that. And there's multiple ones that my mom would teach me, and she would laugh because like she would ask me what it means, and I'm like, I don't know, Mom. Like I would give her the straight translation of it, and she would just break out laughing. She would like try to explain the
she let her have
actual
her
meaning
fun.
behind it. Yeah, and it's always so interesting,
Yeah.
And at one point I did write it all down, like all the ones that she told me, but
Yeah.
I have to go back and find that. But I'd say for me personally, the language would be the number one thing that I would strive to preserve.
Do you have the chance to constantly practice it and not lose it?
Oh no. Now, especially where I am.
Do you feel like you've lost?
Oh, definitely. I've never been 100% fluent.
Okay.
Because Hmong it's a pretty complex language. It's another tonal language, so very similar to Chinese as well too. And just the way you inflect certain words or certain sounds at the end of a word can change its meaning. And so, with that said, I didn't have a full grasp of the vocabulary because
I see.
in Hmong they borrow a lot of words from Thai and from Laotian, and so there's a lot of sayings and things of that nature. And growing up, I didn't have a traditional education in Hmong. The only sort of language class I took was in the church, and they had a very basic intermediate Hmong class where someone who spoke Hmong very well, who knew English too, would teach us how to read and write in Hmong. And you only got so far because it was once a week. It was on a Sunday after Sunday school. But I really took to it as well too. And I don't have a great grasp of it, but I have enough to be able to talk to an older person or to be able to take my time in reading it as well too. My sister, she's really good at it. She's good to the point where my parents would ask her to write out words or write in Hmong for them. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
He's become a reference.
As far as practicing, yeah, she really is a reference. Because sometimes I would write something, I'm like, I'd be so proud of myself, and I'd message her, and I'd be like, "Hey," and I'll write it out, and she'd be like, "Oh, you spelled this wrong," and I'll be like, "Oh crap," and I'll sound it out in my head. I'm like, "Wow, I completely messed that up." And so
she rained on your parade.
Exactly, and all she has to do is say, "Oh, you used the wrong consonant." I'm like, "Oh, great, thanks." And I was so proud of myself. But yeah, in regards to practicing, oh man, I really don't have a chance to practice it out here. I'm not in Texas, definitely. Well, in Austin, Texas, anyway. And so,
I see.
Except for when I call my mom, I try to speak Hmong.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's certain concepts and thoughts that are very hard to put into words in Hmong. But I know for a fact that Hmong is a very poetic language, just from my limited knowledge of it, and I studied linguistics in college, so that's one thing I take from Hmong is that it is definitely a very poetic language. Yeah. So
Cool.
yeah, that was me. How about you?
Me, as in,
Yeah, the culture. Have grown up in Canada. How was your
right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So is it blending or fading?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in a different position where, well, the Chinese community, we're quite a big culture.
Oh, definitely. Oh, for sure.
The
Tell me about it.
population of Chinese people is
How many dumpling restaurants did we see, maybe?
So I don't think that our culture is anywhere near I was gonna say extinction.
Thanks a lot. We're on the verge of extinction, guys. We gotta bounce back.
I don't mean it.
This is the year of
I
the
don't
Hmong
mean
culture.
it in a bad way. But
I totally get it. I mean,
it's
you're not wrong.
It's not it's not, definitely not endangered. So I might have a different perspective because of that. But to answer your question, to sum it up, it's not a black and white answer because I feel like, yeah, is it blending? Yes. Is it fading? Also, yes. Because every time that you, like you said earlier, you take something traditional and you mix it with something new, it's no longer the original thing anymore, right? So it's kind of like a recipe that's been passed down so many generations, but then you tweak it here and there because, I don't know, it's too salty or it's too sweet. You reduce the sugar or something like that. So that you tweak it to your liking. But it is no longer the original thing anymore. Is it bad though? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't think it's bad. So very interesting. A good representation of the situation would be, it's featured in the Marvel movie Shang-Chi and the Seven Rings.
I've never seen
You've
it.
seen it?
No.
Oh.
Don't ruin it. I don't care. I'm just kidding.
Well, it's a good movie. Go watch it.
Does it have Hmong people in it?
But anyways, there's a scene in which the older Chinese generation, people from the older generation.
Oh, okay.
Chinese,
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, they're nagging at the younger kids, and then they're saying how you don't even know how to talk anymore or how to speak. You're losing the language. You're losing the culture. And so, look, listen, it's a valid concern that our elders have. It is valid because it's true. Culture for them and for everybody is part of our identity, right? And unfortunately, this part of our identity, you depend on the others as well, on the others' participation, because you can't keep a culture alive on your own.
Oh, yeah, definitely. For sure.
So that part of your identity, to know that it's solely dependent on the others, not just yourself, is kind of scary because you don't have control of it.
Yeah, true. But you're not the only one who's going through this issue at the same time.
Oh, no.
There's loads
collective.
of other... Yeah, it's collective. As part of a generation, too, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So this leads to my next point, which is basically, should we keep cultural practices, basically? I say keep up with the cultural practices if you identify with said culture, because you'll naturally be doing it anyway.
Yeah.
The contrast to this is some people do reject their culture that they were born in because they've had bad experiences.
Oh, yeah. Rightfully so, too.
Or traumatizing experiences. And it is because of the culture. And I don't think that it would be beneficial to force others to adhere by a cultural practice if they don't want to.
Agreed.
They won't be happy about it.
Yeah.
So I can think of, for example, somewhere in rural India, this 14-year-old girl is forced to be in an arranged marriage with this 60-year-old man.
But it's culture, yeah.
Yeah, she's not going to be happy about it, but it's in her culture.
Yeah.
If she had a choice, I think she would abandon that practice. So basically, to go back to people who fear that their culture is disappearing and their concern, they shouldn't force others to stay in that community if they're not willing to, because if you're part of a certain group or a certain community, you'd want members to be willing to participate, to be part.
Yeah, of their own volition.
Yeah. You don't want it to be forced.
Yeah.
And so a healthy way to preserve a culture, in my opinion, is to introduce that to the next generation in the form of fond memories, which is why I asked you earlier about if you have any fond memories about the Hmong culture. Because if we associate fond memories with the culture, of course, we're going to want to introduce it to the next generation because it was fun for us. It was nice.
Yeah, good memory.
So in my case, yeah, I am fond of the Chinese New Year. We feast. Or I remember when I was a kid, there was the Mid-Autumn Festival, I think.
Oh.
And then you would walk outside in the streets with lanterns.
Oh, nice.
They would be pretty lanterns. The city banned it because it caught fire. too many lanterns caught fire.
Too beautiful. Wow.
because they were paper lanterns,
yeah,
right?
of course.
And you'd have a candle in it. But then us kids, we don't know how to
Be careful.
really. Yeah, so then they banned it. And now I think if you want to celebrate it, it would be that
They have
fake
LEDs, right? What?
candle
Oh, okay.
with the battery.
Oh, okay, the fake
in it.
candle. Okay, that's fine.
And it's not as fun. You know, it's like
It's the
there's
thought that
a-
counts. I mean,
it's
yeah,
different.
I mean that. I mean, you can say that's a modern interpretation of the paper lanterns, a safer
yeah.
alternative for sure.
Yeah, true. And it's not like this future generation will know of the difference anyway. They're born with the safer option.
Oh yeah, and that reminds me. So during Hmong New Year, on top of like the traditional garments that they wear, the dresses and things that they wear, traditionally you wear these huge, heavy silver, I guess, necklaces.
Jewelry?
But they're like these massive necklaces,
Oh my god.
and they're so heavy. And now they don't make them out of like pure silver. Sometimes they're plastic or things like that, just because they're so massive and expensive on top of that too. And so that's one of the things I remember seeing, because I remember going to New Year and seeing people wear these fake ones. And I'm like, why are they wearing these fake traditional necklaces? When all I knew was my mom's ones that she had that was passed down, that were like pure silver and things like that, and very incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
And seeing all these, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it's more accessible than it was
That's
before.
true. That's true. They're practicing smarter.
Yeah. You don't want to be walking around with like 25-pound necklace around your neck.
That kind of reminds me of Chinese brides where they have like so many gold jewelries.
Oh gosh.
And it would be like usually like 24 karat too. And so it would be heavy on them. And I think India as well, when they they go through the Indian wedding, they have a lot of gold jewelries. My goodness. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah, it's a nice symbolic gesture, but man, imagine having to wear it all.
Heavy.
Ooh.
Luckily, it's only for one night though.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but aside for that, I remember fondly of making dumplings, for example, right? Because it's a lot of hard work. And so when you make dumplings, you make it in a big batch, and then you call everybody up, Okay, maybe not everybody that you know, but like, friends and family, a couple, and then they sit down, and then we all make dumplings together, and we just chit chat for a couple hours while we make the dumplings, right? So it's a way to catch up.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's my take on the Asian culture blending. And so let's move on to the next topic, which is, what are your thoughts on interracial dating?
Yeah. Interracial dating. Interesting. Chris brought this up in his letter. This, I guess, goes along with the whole cultural blending aspect of traditions and practices and things like that. Ultimately, my opinion is that it's not really an issue. I think sometimes we end up with people, we can't really choose who you end up with. And so if you're specifically looking to preserve a culture so that you will only date somebody who's part of that culture, I mean, good luck and wish you your best. But I think it's better to go in with just being who you are. And it's ultimately up to you and your partner whether or not you decide together what parts of a culture you want to take, because it's not just going to be your culture, it's going to be theirs, unless obviously there's somebody from the same culture. But even then, they might have different traditions and practices that your family was not brought up on, and so there's always going to be a give and take approach to it, because ultimately it's a two-way street. You can't just tell somebody, like you said earlier, like, oh, we're gonna preserve this, we're gonna only teach our kids this, we're gonna celebrate only this, because you are starting your own chapter in your life with somebody else, and they're starting their own chapter away from what they knew and what they grew up on. And the ideal situation would be both of you guys developing or keeping or adding on to traditions and cultures that you both share. And whether or not you are from the same culture or background, I think it really doesn't matter, because even if you're from the same background or same race, you still have differences in culture. And even in Hmong, there's differences in language as well too, in accents as well. So you can't really say that it's I just don't think it's a bad thing, Obviously, those in the older generations, especially in like you said, Amy, an extinct culture like Hmong, they might want to try to keep it preserved.
Yeah.
But I think, after talking to my parents and some older generation folks, they want what they think is best, but they know that it will be ultimately up to you to decide. But that's really all they can do, because they can't force us to do it. So what will they do? The only thing they can do is tell us. As nagging as it may be, as constantly telling you every time you see them all the time, ultimately it's still going to be up to you, as long as you understand that it's just what they will say and you don't take it to heart. Some people might see that as toxic. I totally get it. But
Is it though?
again, because I mean, if they are disregarding your boundaries and they constantly, even though they know how you will react and know your thoughts on it, they will constantly tell you regardless. And then their reasoning for that is that they can't do anything else except tell you, because that's all they can do. And whether or not you choose to do it, it's up to you, but they're going to still keep doing it because that's just quote unquote who they are. And I think a modern perspective of that is that that's kind of a toxic behavior, but it's a hard line to draw, because
I feel like it becomes toxic the moment they force that person. I honestly feel like they can certainly present their culture or show you or guide you in their own ways. They can't really force you, though.
Oh, of course. It's ultimately up to you to decide what you want to do. And you have to remember that. I think some people fall into the trap of where they're like, oh, I have to do this. I have to. I mean, you don't have to.
You don't.
You may think you do, but you don't have to. I mean, but obviously it's never black and white. You have those times where they really do force you.
Yeah.
Obviously, of course, at that point, there needs to be intervention of some kind, basically, unfortunately. But yeah, and then ultimately, the last thing to add for me to interracial dating is it's ultimately going to come down to respect. That's really it. Whether or not it's two different races or two same races, it's going to be out of respect. How you approach this relationship together and how you move forward is take what you can and they take what they can, and you make something out new from that, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that joke from Russell Peters. At some point he was saying, that's how he was saying how like the future is inevitable.
Yeah.
You're going to have little mixed babies everywhere. Like there's no stopping it. There's just going to be a mixture of even tone people. Like we're all going to have the same skin tone at some point further down the line.
Yeah. And it would be a shame if we didn't have that. I personally am for it, because it just makes the world go round, in my opinion. Like you have so many different people from different backgrounds all mixing in. It just the closest thing we have to a unified version of humanity, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's more acceptance, there's less division, right? There's diversity, there's less division. That's how you end racism, according to Russell Peters. But yeah, I would agree with your opinion. Basically, I'm all for it as well. I'm in an interracial relationship. I remember my mom preferring that I date Chinese guys because gotta keep the culture going, gotta keep the language alive.
Culture. Yep.
But at the end of the day, that's her preference. That's her opinion.
Yeah.
And I understand it. But I make my own decisions. And eventually, she sees him as her own son. But I know that not every immigrant parent is like that. Some people do get disowned for being in an interracial relationship, especially if you have a very, very, very strict parents, strict culture. And it's such a shame.
Truly.
Because like you said before, right? Like you said earlier, I was going somewhere with this. But you mentioned something earlier about how people may think they don't have a choice, but they do. But it's just that they've been conditioned for such a long time to think that they don't have a choice.
For sure.
But I've always viewed, well, if your life was a book, right, the book of life, then you should be the only author to have access writing that book.
Yeah.
right? Like your parents can guide you and give you advice and all of that, but ultimately you should be able to take control of your own life.
Oh yeah, they can help brainstorm, they can help give you advice and guidelines, but you're the one writing it. So yeah, it's ultimately up to you how you want to guide the book and your story.
I've heard a lot of people saying things like, but then I'll be shunned from my community, but then I'll be disowned or I'll be isolated. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, if you are because you want to do what you want to do, then is it worth being in such a community anyway?
Yeah. Yeah,
Is it worth staying in such a community?
It's tough. I can see that because like especially if say for example you're from a more affluent family and if you get disowned, then say for the longest time your parents took care of your schooling, your allowance and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden to take that away, it isn't just the fact that they're shunning you, it's that they're pushing you to a way of life that you're not used to.
I see.
In the snap of a finger, it's not just that you lose your culture or what you're used to, it's you are now starting at the very bottom of what you know. Which, yeah, if I'm somebody who's not from that, I would just see, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and take charge of your life. But that's, if you put yourself in that person's shoes, no matter how rich they were or not, how much their parents took care of them, and for them to have that taken away from them, you can't help but feel for them, because it's not that they chose to grow up that way. It's just that that's what they did with their parents, and then now all of a sudden the parents take that away from them. A part of me is empathetic towards that, because they chose to stand up for themselves, and yet this is what happens.
I got two things to say in regards to that.
Yeah.
First thing is, if that person is under 18, that is child abuse. That is child abuse.
Oh, yeah.
And if that person is over 18, then that means that your parents set you up to be financially dependent on them. So you don't have that financial independency. So they ensure that you don't disobey them. That is a very controlling way to parent.
But do you think they understand that though?
They don't.
I mean, knowing our culture, I guess, the Asian culture, I don't think like that's their intent.
Yeah,
but obviously they've weaponized that ultimately.
Yeah. So to answer your question, they don't know.
Yeah.
Because they grew up like that too.
Yeah, exactly.
So they don't know any better. But to that, I will say somewhere down along the lines, that cycle has to be broken. It has to.
Yeah, true. It starts with us today. Just kidding.
That's it, guys. Break the cycle.
I mean, you would think, but, I feel like it's roughly 50-50. I think, because it's tough, because there's certain things that work, but then it can't work moving forward. Like, corporal punishment. I thought it works, but obviously people see it as child abuse. But I think for me, there's definitely a fine line there, because I knew that my parents punished me when they whipped me or whatever. It was really because I did something wrong, and I knew I did something wrong.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that there are those who are truly abusive who will hit you for every little thing. And so that's where it's hard for me to just say, oh yeah, I'm all for corporal punishment. But it's weird, because that's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
And there are very many that are not best case scenario.
So,
so I totally get that.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
I grew up with that too.
Yeah.
And for me, in my case, my mom whooped me mainly because, well, sure, I may have done something wrong, but it's mainly because she wasn't well equipped mentally to know how to manage her own emotions.
I see.
Right? And so the only way her own way of managing her emotions was to take it out on her kids.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I don't agree with.
Yeah, that's definitely different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know when I believe I was 17, my dad sat me down and he told me that from this point on, he's not going to yell at us or hit us anymore. And from that point on, it was even scarier when my parents were disappointed in me for something I did. And I would
emotional damage.
Yeah, I would want so much for them to go back to yelling and hitting me, because knowing that I disappointed them and they have nothing else more to say was way worse than being a brat and talking back and cussing my parents and having them whip me or whatever.
So interesting, because me is the exact opposite. I would rather her being disappointed at me or something like that, because that worked better for me. And then I never do it again. Whenever she was about to whoop me, total fear. I would start bawling my eyes out, and then she would like yell at me to be on the floor, like get in position, right? but you know, if you try to run for it, like Prison Break, no, don't do it. Don't ever do it. It's
You just take the L, man. That's it. Take the L, move on. Cry your heart out.
Yo, you're gonna be whooped twice as hard, twice as long. So don't do it.
Yeah.
I have the opposite opinion in that regards. Well, that's what makes it fun, right?
What? I guess so.
I guess so. That's what makes it fun having different opinions.
Trying to figure out what to say to so your parents don't hit you.
Wait.
Jesus. It wasn't me. It was my brother.
You're twisting my words. I meant it's fun having different opinions.
Oh, okay.
Not the ass whooping. I'm not for that.
Okay. Understandable.
Anyway, so with that, it pretty much, I think that wraps up our discussion today.
Lively.
So thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Chris, for those very interesting questions. Guys, this was super fun, and we hope to hear from you with more questions, topic suggestions, or comments by writing to us at theamtake@gmail.com. That is theamtake@gmail.com.
All right. And so next week, our topic is going to be the trials and tribulations of living in a foreign country. Join us next week. We're going to have a special guest. It's going to be our first guest. His name is Brian, who's had the pleasure of living abroad for at least a decade. And he'll be here next week with us to talk through his journeys and his trials and tribulations of living abroad. So hope you guys will be able to join us next week. And we'll see you guys then.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.